Hey everyone, hope that you're all doing well today. So today we're back with yet again another video discussing the Season 11 item changes in League of Legends. Now, as of this video going up, we just kicked off patch 11.2, and with Riot doing their usual adjustments to champions, obviously with an item rework, there's also tons of adjustments happening with items right now. So as I was browsing around Reddit, I came across a post that talks about the current state of items as well as the current state of mythic passives. So it reads as follows: Riot's stance on mythic passives is exactly what the community complained about when Runes Reforged launched. Bonus stats being tied to items removes creativity and pigeonholes many characters. Now, the first paragraph underneath talks about what originally happened with Runes Reforged, which was if you went Precision first and then Domination secondary, that would give you a set couple of stats, which would be like 9 attack damage and 9% attack speed. But if you decided to go Precision and then Inspiration, it would give you 18% attack speed in addition to your trees, but no bonus attack damage. So because that shoehorned in too many champions into too few rune combinations, they removed the bonus stats and then added the 3 extra stats that you could pick at the bottom of your secondary tree, which would be the double adaptive damage, attack speed, haste, armor, magic resistance, scaling health, obviously. Now, the second paragraph talks about how there's been too much taken out of legendaries and put into the mythic passives to give back to the legendaries essentially. And the last paragraph I'll just read real quick because it's short. I think a much better approach would be to remove the mythic passive and restore some power to the items, although this would remove Riot's fantasy of having mythics be a keystone item that every champ needs one of. So basically, I want to address what is going on with item builds specifically, why it's better, and what Riot is essentially trying to do with those mythic stats. So the first thing I want to address is the first issue that this post brings up, which is talking about creativity in builds. Now, to understand where creativity of builds can come from, we want to take a look at where item builds currently sit. So essentially what Riot has done, and as I have mentioned in multiple comments to you guys, as well as a few videos in the past concerning the item rework, is essentially Riot has created item builds in a formulaic way. So in the past, basically you would have to know that you build boots, but then you would have to also have your core build memorized as if all 5 of those items were considered legendary. Now what Riot has done is they've streamlined a design where you build your boots, then you build your mythic, and then you build your 4 legendaries. However, typically you want to reverse the 2 and go mythic, boots, and then legendaries. Now obviously there are exceptions to the rules, one example being Riven building Ravenous Hydra before she builds Gore Drinker, because statistically that is the better item for her to get first. We're going to focus on the formula that Riot intends, which is mythic, boots, and then 4 legendaries. Now, the reason Riot set it up this way is for new players, it makes them easier to understand build paths and how you're supposed to build items and the order in which you build items in this game. But for experienced players, both in mid and high elos, it's more streamlined for them to understand. So instead of knowing in one patch that maybe I'll build Blade of the Ruined King first, and then the next patch I would build Trinity Force first, now I know that with Mythics being the item I want to focus on, I can know in a faster amount of time that it's this formula of Mythic boots or legendaries. Now, when it comes to whether or not Riot has stifled creativity, I really don't think they necessarily have, and there's 2 reasons for that. First of all, with the exception of supports, because they have so few items, if you look at all the new items across all the other classes in terms of legendaries, there are so many to pick and choose from that you can experiment with builds, and chances are it's probably going to work out. And you can also mix and match legendaries from different classes. So a good example would be Mordekaiser is somebody who is a melee bruiser mage. He would also want to flip over to the tank page and pick up Spirit Visage for the haste and the healing. So that right there is a good example of, instead of going full mage, you can grab some more practical durability to add to both your health pool and to your healing. Now, for the second thing we also have to keep in mind is optimized builds as well. Because no matter if it's Season 1 or Season 11, ever since this game began, and with other strategy games, MOBAs, and even shooters, a meta is always going to exist. The highest percentage of win rate for items, champions, weapons, whatever game you're playing, is always and inherently and naturally going to exist. So at the end of the day, creativity can still exist and you can make other things work, but when it gets down to the nitty-gritty of it and you're trying to win games either in solo queue or for the pros, for example, they're not going to be doing things that are necessarily experimental. They're going to do things that produce the highest win rates and the highest results. Part of which is why the champion pools up in high MMR as well as pros are so small. But in the case of items here, does creativity still exist? Yes. Can creativity exist despite the fact that mythics exist? Yes. But what does it all boil down to at the end of the day? It boils down to the fact that win rates are going to dominate what happens in this game no matter what. So even though creativity may exist and can still happen, win rates are going to determine what you build. Now the next thing I want to talk about is whether or not mythic passives and the stats they give legendaries is what is pigeonholing champions and putting them in an awkward spot. Now, I think it's the items themselves and not necessarily the stats they give, although Trinity Force giving Spirit Visage attack speed is kind of hysterical. What I think is happening is, on the one hand, you have items that were specifically made for champions and for specific reasons. So, in the case of Gore Drinker is clearly a Darken item. You always want to build this on Aatrox, and you always want to build this on Kayn. Clearly, they're in the middle of people, you activate it, deal damage, and restore missing health. Whereas, in Jax's case, you have two very weird options. So, Jax's kit is primarily AD with a focus on attack speed, but his W and his passive deal magic damage. So, naturally, you would think that, okay, with Divine Sunderer, for example, because he's auto-attack based, the Sheen damage deals % max health, and the Mythic passive grants hybrid penetration. So by late game, we'll have 20% armor pen and 20% magic pen. Here's his problem. Trinity Force also exists as a Mythic passive, and one of the things that Jax needs is attack speed. So the question you have to ask yourself with Jax then is, do you want to go more hybrid damage with less attack speed, even though Jax is supposed to auto-attack people to death? Or do you want to go more of an AD focus with an increase on your attack speed, but then missing out on the % health damage from Divine Sunderer, as well as the magic penetration, which is really useful for his W and his passive on his ultimate. And herein lies one of the biggest problems to come out of the item changes of Season 11. Now, is it necessarily that these items themselves are what is pigeonholing certain champions and putting them in awkward spots? Or is it necessarily what Riot has tried to do with items overall? Well, looking again at the Jax example, Divine Sunderer is meant to be anti-tank. So if Jax builds that, he'll get the % health on the Sheen as well as the hybrid penetration, but he doesn't get any attack speed. With the Triforce, however, he gets attack speed as well as burst damage on the AD side, but he doesn't get any % health or hybrid penetration, thus putting Jax in this awkward position. So what does this mean in terms of what Riot has tried to do? Well, rather than pigeonholing champions and the items putting them in awkward states, rather Riot has tried to create an item for almost every feasible situation in the game. Looking at a legendary item, for example, Serpent's Fang is made to deal more damage to shields and against team comps that give other champions on their team shields. Sure, you can build that to deal more damage to shields if that's what you're having an issue dealing with, but there are other and better items that assassins and maybe even some fighters can be building rather than building an item that deals more damage just to shields. And so putting that in an awkward spot simply because you have to waste the gold as well as the item slot to get those additional stats just to deal with that situation. Now, where does this leave us exactly? Well, the last part of this post essentially says that the stats that the mythics give to legendaries should be removed from the mythics, and more power should be given back to the legendaries, while keeping the formula of boots, 1 mythic, and 4 legendaries. Now, using the point that I just made of how multiple items and more items have been made for more situations, I disagree with this because I think what needs to happen is that there needs to be a closer look to tailor these items more toward champions rather than situations. You know, and to just give a couple quick suggestions, maybe Divine Sunderer needs some attack speed. Maybe an item like Eclipse could use 10 haste. You know, there's a few legendaries that even I don't understand why they were nerfed the way they were. Yomu's Ghostblade not having haste anymore. Nashor's Tooth and Lichbane not having haste anymore. You know, there are certain decisions on that end that I don't understand were made. But I think what needs to happen is that items that are putting champions in awkward spots, or the fact that there are certain mythics that don't quite fit the champion that needs to build one or the other, need to be taken a look at and tailored more towards the champion rather than towards the situation, and I think that's what's going to primarily solve the problem of mythics in that case. Well guys, that's all I have for you today. There's my 2 cents in on the current state of items, as well as responding to this Reddit post and what is going on with mythics and champions being in awkward situations, as well as creativity and build paths. Don't forget to hit me up on Twitter, as well as for some awesome video game photography. Don't forget to hit me up on Instagram. And as always, guys, thank you very much for watching, and we will see each other again tomorrow. Have a wonderful day.